Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring something really fundamental to how we learn, how we improve. It's called metacognition.
Thinking about thinking.
Exactly. And this particular dive is really interesting. It stems from sources shared by a listener focused on improving education. And we're especially pleased this is welcomed by the PIQC Institute of Quality, that's PIQC, as part of their effort to boost education quality in schools, colleges, and universities across Pakistan.
Yeah, it's a great focus. So our goal here, looking at this material, is to really understand what metacognition is, why it's so vital for students, naturally, but also for teachers, for the institutions themselves. Then we'll explore some practical ways to actually use it, look at potential challenges.
His goals, yeah.
Hurdles, exactly, and really connect it to enhancing education quality, specifically in that context you mentioned.
Right, really gets down to harnessing the power of, thinking about your own thinking.
Yeah.
And the sources suggest some pretty amazing benefits. Better learning, definitely, but also real self-improvement.
Tangible results.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What is metacognition? Break it down for us.
Okay, so at its heart, it's just that. Thinking about your own thinking. The word itself gives you a clue, right? Meta, meaning sort of beyond or on top of.
Mm-hmm.
And cognition, that's thinking, so it's that extra layer of awareness about your thoughts.
Like having a little supervisor in your head watching how you're thinking.
Kind of, yeah. But it's not just passive watching. It's also about regulating or managing how you think.
Oh, okay. Active control.
Exactly. Reflecting on your thought process and then actively guiding how you think and learn. The sources are really clear. Building this skill isn't just academic. It's vital for being more productive, more effective.
So it helps you become a better learner.
A much better learner, yeah. And gain more conscious control over your thoughts and actions. It's about being strategic.
Right. Deliberate about how you approach things, not just the what.
Yeah.
The sources mention two main parts. Seems useful.
They do, generally. First, there's knowledge of cognition. This is basically your awareness of yourself as a learner. What factors influence your learning? It also includes knowing different strategies exist, like ways to memorize things or ways to solve problems and knowing which one might fit a situation.
Okay, so knowing things like I'm a visual learner or I get distracted easily if there's noise, that kind of thing.
Exactly. That's part of it. Then the second component is regulation of cognition.
Regulation. So the doing part.
Pretty much. This is putting that knowledge to work. It means setting goals for a task, planning your approach, monitoring how well you're understanding things as you go along, controlling your learning process, like maybe switching strategies if one isn't working, and then evaluating how well you did afterwards. How effective was your thinking?
Okay. So it's the difference between just, say, reading a textbook chapter versus actively stopping and asking, wait, did I actually get that? Is this highlighting technique helping? Maybe I should try summarizing instead.
You nailed it. That's the regulation in action, that self-monitoring and adjustment. And within that knowledge part, the sources break it down a bit further into 3 types of metacognitive knowledge. Useful distinction.
Okay, let's touch on those quickly.
First is declarative knowledge. Think knowing that. It's knowing facts about yourself as a learner and about what influences your performance, like knowing that you struggle with remembering dates unless you use a mnemonic.
Got it. Knowing that something affects you or that you have a certain tendency.
Right. Second is procedural knowledge. That's knowing how. This is your knowledge of the actual strategies, the techniques, knowing how to summarize effectively or how to use a mind map, the toolbox, essentially.
The how-to guides in your head.
Exactly. And the third type is conditional knowledge. This is knowing when and why. This one's maybe the most sophisticated. It's about knowing when to pull out a specific strategy from your toolbox and why it's the right one for this particular task or situation. It helps you use your mental energy efficiently.
Okay, so putting it all together, metacognition is being aware of how you learn, declarative, having the tools, procedural, knowing when and why to use them, conditional, and actively managing that whole process, regulation.
That's a great summary. It's that control system overseeing your learning engine.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really fascinating. Why does this matter so much?
Yeah.
Especially thinking about education, which is the focus here.
Yeah.
The impact seems huge.
Oh, it is. The sources really emphasize the benefits, especially for students. One really big one is the connection to higher achievement. Some research suggests strong metacognitive skills can actually help make up for maybe lower cognitive ability in certain areas or even a lack of background knowledge.
Wow, that's significant. So consciously managing how you learn can actually boost your performance beyond just raw talent or what you already know.
That's what the evidence points towards, yeah.
Yeah.
It also massively boosts a student's ability to learn independently. Well, if you can monitor your own understanding, figure out what's working for you, what's not, you're much less reliant on the teacher constantly guiding you. You can steer your own learning.
And I imagine that builds resilience, too, if you hit a roadblock.
Totally. You learn to see mistakes not just as failures, but as information. Okay, that strategy didn't work. What can I try next? You learn from setbacks. And the sources specifically mention it's particularly helpful for disadvantaged students. It's seen as a low-cost way to make a big impact on their outcomes, which ties into improving overall education quality.
That's a crucial point. And these skills aren't just stuck in one subject, are they?
No, not at all. That's another huge plus. They're highly transferable. The way you plan an essay in history uses similar metacognitive muscles to how you plan to tackle a tough physics problem. It works across reading, writing, math, memorizing. You name it.
So really foundational.
Absolutely. And it helps students of all ages, from little kids right up through university and beyond.
I was really struck by that finding mentioned in the sources that effective metacognitive strategies could be worth like an extra 7 months of learning progress. 7 months.
It's a pretty stunning figure, isn't it? It really highlights the potential. And it's not just academics. The sources also mention benefits for emotional and social growth.
How does that work?
Well, greater self-awareness helps you understand your own emotions and reactions better, and that often leads to better understanding of other people, too.
So it helps you become a more well-rounded person, not just a better student.
That's the idea. And it's vital for teachers and institutions, too, of course.
Right. How does it help them?
Well, understanding metacognition helps teachers see how their students are actually thinking and learning, not just what they produce at the end. It allows for much more targeted teaching and support.
Seeing the process, not just the product.
Exactly. And it helps cultivate what the sources call self-regulated learner students who are strategic, reflective, who take ownership. That's the hallmark of an expert learner.
It sounds like a really fundamental shift, moving beyond just delivering information to actually teaching students how to engage with and manage that information.
And that leads to maybe the single most important takeaway from all these sources. Metacognition has to be taught explicitly.
Explicitly. You can't just hope students pick it up.
No, you can't leave it to chance. Students need to be directly taught these strategies, how they work, when to use them. It needs to be part of the instruction alongside the subject content itself.
Learning how to learn cannot be left to students. It must be taught. That quote really stuck with me.
Powerful, isn't it?
Okay, so if it must be taught, how do we actually do that? What are some practical strategies teachers can use? Or even students can start using themselves?
Right. The good news is these are skills. They can be learned, practiced, and eventually become habits. The key is using activities that get students actively involved, thinking about their process before, during, and after a task. And these can happen individually, in pairs, small groups, lots of formats.
Okay, give us some examples where it's a good place to start.
A really basic but powerful one is just building in regular reflection or self-assessment. Getting students into the habit of pausing and asking themselves, how did I tackle that? What went well? What was tricky? What would I do differently next time? Teachers need to prompt this.
Like a mental debrief after every task.
Exactly. Another great one is thinking aloud.
Thinking aloud.
Yeah. Teachers can model their own thinking process. Like when solving a math problem, actually say out loud, okay, first I need to understand what the question is asking. This looks like I need to use formula X. Let me try that.
Making the internal monologue external.
Precisely. And students can do it too. Maybe in pairs, one student talks through their problem-solving steps while the other listens, maybe asks questions, or just records the process. It makes the thinking visible.
That sounds really useful. What about writing? Does that help?
Oh, definitely. Writing is fantastic for reflection. Even simple things like a jumpstart journal at the beginning of class.
Jumpstart journal.
Yeah, just a few minutes of writing on a prompt like, what's one goal you have for this lesson? Or, what was the muddiest point for you from the homework? Gets their metacognitive gears turning.
Quick and focused.
Right. Or more structured, reflective writing. Asking students to connect what they just learned to things they already know, or to describe their process, their reactions. Prompts like, the key takeaway for me was, or, Two things I'm still confused about are: one source mentioned an MIT class using journals for students to track progress, thoughts, questions about the material.
That's a great way to track learning over time. I also like the idea of letters to future students mentioned in the material.
Yeah, that's a nice end-of-term reflection. Thinking about the journey, the challenges, advice they give really solidifies the learning experience.
Okay, so reflection, thinking aloud, writing. What else?
Well, even things like graphic organizers, mind maps, flowcharts, concept maps, these aren't just ways to take notes. They're tools for thinking about how ideas connect. Teachers can model creating these to show relationships between concepts.
Visualizing the structure of your thoughts. Yeah, that makes sense.
It really does. And basic study skills, when taught metacognitively, become powerful. Think about active reading or listening.
You mean like underlining or making eye contact?
Exactly, but it's about teaching students why these help them focus and comprehend. Underlining forces you to decide what's important. Facing the speaker improves focus. These are conscious choices, strategies.
So it's explaining the purpose behind the technique.
Precisely. Same with things like memory aids, mnemonics, rhymes, acronyms. Teaching these techniques helps students encode information better, which frees up mental bandwidth for deeper thinking.
Like ROYGBIV for the colors of the rainbow.
Perfect example. And something simple like requiring students to show their work in math or science.
Yeah.
That's metacognitive too. It forces them to make their thinking process explicit step by step, so they and the teacher can review it, find errors, understand the logic.
Leaving a trail of their thinking.
Exactly. Helping students become aware of their own learning styles or preferences. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic can also guide them to choose better strategies. And a really structured way to boost self-awareness is using something like a SWOT analysis.
SWOT, like in business, for students.
Yeah, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But applied to themselves as learners, what are they good at? Where do they struggle? What resources could help? What obstacles might get in the way? Very metacognitive.
That's quite a structured self-reflection.
It is. And starting a new topic with pre-assessment, asking students, what do you already know about this, is also key.
Why is that metacognitive?
Because it activates their prior knowledge, gets them thinking about existing mental frameworks, and helps them connect the new information. Plus, it helps the teacher spot misconceptions early on.
Right, priming the pump.
Exactly. Now, a really critical piece emphasized in the sources is explicit instruction and modeling by the teacher. Teachers need to directly teach metacognitive strategies, planning, monitoring, evaluating, and then show students how they use these strategies themselves, talking through their own thinking process.
So the teacher acts as a model thinker.
Yes. Okay, before I start writing this paragraph, I need to think about my main point. Or, I seem to be stuck on this problem. Maybe I should reread the question or try a different approach. Verbalizing that internal process.
Makes the invisible visible again.
Right. And that modeling should lead into guided practice.
Guided practice.
Where students try out the strategies with support, maybe hints, prompts, partially completed examples. The teacher facilitates, provides feedback, but the student does the heavy lifting.
Scaffolding the learning.
Exactly. And then eventually you move to independent practice, where students are choosing, using, and evaluating strategies on their own. Crucially, this independent practice should involve challenging tasks.
Why challenging?
Because easy tasks don't require much strategic thinking or reflection. You learn more about your strategies when you struggle a bit and have to figure things out. Mistakes become learning opportunities.
That makes sense. Struggle is where the growth happens.
It often is. And building in regular structured reflection time is vital. Not just hoping they reflect, but dedicating class time with specific prompts.
Like what?
Simple things. What's one new thing you learned today? What strategy did you use in that activity? What are you still unsure about? Studies show this dedicated reflection significantly boosts understanding.
KWL charts. What I know, what I want to know, what I learned fit here too, right?
Classic example. Simple structure for planning and review. Another really clever technique mentioned is using cognitive wrappers.
Cognitive wrappers. Sounds interesting.
They are. They're short metacognitive activities that you wrap around an existing task, like a lecture, homework, or even an exam.
Okay, give me an example, like an exam wrapper.
Exactly. So after students get an exam back, they fill out a short questionnaire. It asks things like, How did you prepare for this exam? What strategies did you use? How much time did you spend? What kinds of errors did you make? What will you do differently to prepare next time?
Ah, so it forces them to connect their preparation and strategies to their actual performance.
Precisely. It turns the exam from just a grade into a rich source of data for improving their learning process. And it's efficient, doesn't add a huge burden.
That's really smart.
It is. Other ideas include setting rules about asking for help, encouraging students to really try to solve it themselves first, or to formulate a very specific question before coming to the teacher. Promotes self-reliance.
Makes them pinpoint their confusion.
Yes. Or encouraging metacognitive talk students, literally talking themselves through a task using prompts like, okay, what's the goal here? What do I know already? How am I doing? Does this make sense?
Like internal self-coaching, but out loud?
Sort of, yeah. And things like reciprocal teaching, where students teach strategies or concepts to each other, really deepens their own understanding.
You have to really get it to teach it.
Definitely. Even using questionnaires about approaches to learning, asking students if they tend to use surface memorization versus seeking deep understanding can spark self-reflection. Or guiding strategic resource use, asking why they chose a specific website or book. And finally, using assessment methods like portfolios can encourage metacognition, especially if students include reflections on their work, their challenges, and how they've grown.
Wow, okay. That is a lot of practical stuff. It really shows how metacognition can be woven into teaching in so many ways.
It really can.
But, like anything worthwhile, it's probably not always easy. What are some of the challenges or pitfalls the sources mention when trying to implement this?
Yeah, there are definitely hurdles. A big one is the accuracy of student self-assessment.
Meaning?
Well, students, especially novices in a subject, aren't always great judges of their own understanding or skill level. They can be prone to certain biases.
Biases. Like being overconfident.
That's a common one. Or mistaking familiarity, oh yeah, I recognize that term, for actual deep understanding. There's also something called foresight bias.
Foresight bias.
Yeah, where you overestimate how well you'll remember something in the future because it feels clear right now in the current context. You feel you get it while studying, but then can't recall it during the test.
Oh, I think everyone's experienced that. Feeling confident, then blanking.
Exactly. Another challenge is that students, maybe especially those who did well in previous systems without being very metacognitive, might have really ingrained habits that are hard to change.
Resistance to new ways of learning.
Yeah, this worked for me before. Why change? It often takes sustained effort, longer-term interventions to shift those habits. Patience is key.
Okay, what else?
Ensuring consistent integration across the whole curriculum can be tough. If only one teacher is doing it, the skills might not transfer well. It needs a more coordinated approach.
Buy-in from multiple teachers or the whole school.
Ideally, yes. Also, motivation. Students are more likely to put in the metacognitive effort for topics they find interesting or relevant. Teachers need to work on highlighting that relevance.
Connecting it to their interests or goals.
Right, and choosing tasks at the right level of challenge is crucial. Too easy, and there's no need for metacognition. Too hard, and students get overwhelmed, cognitive overload, and shut down. It's a delicate balance.
The Goldilocks zone of difficulty.
Kinda, yeah. And finally, just managing expectations. Metacognitive growth takes time. You might not see huge leaps immediately. It requires persistence.
It's building a habit, a skill, not flipping a switch.
Exactly.
So, given those challenges, what are the key guidelines the sources suggest for successfully developing and implementing metacognition?
The sources provide a pretty clear roadmap, actually. Key things include: first, explicitly teach the strategies. Name them, explain them, discuss when and why to use them. Don't assume students know.
Be direct about it.
Yes. Second, model it constantly. Teachers need to think aloud, show their planning, monitoring, evaluating.
Walk the talk.
Right. Third, provide tons of opportunities for practice, both guided with support and independent on their own. Repetition builds fluency.
Practice, practice, practice.
Fourth, deliberately build in reflection time. Make it a routine part of learning activities.
Make space for it.
Fifth, provide effective feedback that focuses on the process and the strategies used, not just the right or wrong answer.
Feedback on the how, not just the what.
Exactly. Sixth, use a variety of metacognitive activities. Keep it engaging and target different aspects of metacognition.
Mix it up.
Seventh, make sure tasks are appropriately challenging, that sweet spot we talked about.
Not too easy, not too hard.
Eighth, crucially, train teachers. They need to understand metacognition and feel confident using these strategies themselves.
Empower the educators.
Ninth, teach students how to self-assess more accurately. Techniques like testing themselves later, delayed retrieval rather than immediately, or mixing up different types of problems, interleaving, give a truer picture of understanding than just rereading notes.
Teach them how to check their own understanding better.
Yes. And finally, always try to highlight the relevance and interest of the material. Connect it to students' lives and goals to boost that intrinsic motivation.
Make it matter to them. That's a really solid set of guidelines.
It provides a good framework for anyone looking to foster these skills systematically.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. Thinking about our listener and the PIQC Institute of Quality's work in Pakistan. What's the core message from this deep dive into metacognition?
I think the core message is that focusing on metacognition isn't just some nice educational theory. It's a really powerful, practical strategy for genuinely enhancing the quality of education. It aligns perfectly with the goal of improving learning outcomes because it empowers students to become active agents in their own learning. They learn how to learn.
Right. By teaching students to think about their thinking, you're giving them a tool they can use for their entire lives, in any situation. They become more capable, more adaptable learners.
Exactly. And for the teachers, the educators, the institutions there in Pakistan, investing time and effort in building these skills in students. That's a direct investment in the quality of the next generation. You're not just teaching them history or science, you're equipping them with the capacity for lifelong learning, preparing them for a complex future, for contributing effectively to society.
That's a powerful motivation for teachers and for students listening.
For students, developing your metacognitive abilities. Well, it's probably one of the most significant things you can do for your own future. It's about understanding yourself better, taking control, and seriously boosting your own capabilities, not just in school, but in everything you do. It equips you to tackle challenges effectively.
It really puts you in the driver's seat of your own development.
Absolutely. It's about becoming, as you said earlier, the conscious architect of your own learning and growth.
And that quote you mentioned earlier really drives it home for everyone involved in education.
It does. It bears repeating. Learning how to learn cannot be left to students. It must be taught.
A clear call to action and a really hopeful message about the potential within every learner. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the crucial world of metacognition.
My pleasure. Thank you.